Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are today. I'm Gina Anzalone. I'm the membership manager here with SLAS. I want to thank you and welcome you to today's Technology Idea Exchange, the Orchestration Challenge. Today, we are joined by two individuals who will be facilitating this session. I would like to do two brief introductions and then we'll get the presentation kicked off. First is Russell Green, Principal Product Marketing Manager. Russ is a career lifelong science automation advocate. He's been in the industry since he received his PhD in structural molecular biology. He has worked across hardware and software providers in the space, both commercially and developing products for liquid handlers, integrated systems, orchestration, and complex experimental management software. Thank you so much today for joining us, Russ. Crystal is the lab scientist turned product manager at HighRes. She's worked for 14 years in drug discovery research, automating early assay design through high throughput screens and compound management workflows. She recently joined HighRes as a product manager to continue to bring her scientific perspective into solutions created for customers. If either one of you want to give any more of an introduction to yourselves, I welcome that now.
That was amazing, Gina. Thank you.
You did a great job.
Wonderful. All right. Well, we can kick off the presentation piece. I'd like to ask if you have any questions about the presentation that come up while we're going through, please feel free to throw them in the chat. We have saved time for the end of today's Technology Idea Exchange for Q&A.
Great. Thanks, Gina. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining today. It's a real pleasure to be given a chance to speak. So today we want to talk to you about the orchestration challenge. And in particular, we're going to cover a few different areas around the problems or the challenges of bringing orchestration to the laboratory. And one of those being the physical to digital connectivity piece. And we want to speak about why we think automation vendors are particularly well placed to try and assist with this. The general format's going to be, I'm going to present for around about 25 minutes and cover four main topics. I want to align us all about orchestration, what it is and how it came to be and where we are today. And then talk about two of these particular challenges, one being the physical to digital connectivity piece, how hard it can be to actually join up the physical components of a laboratory with your digital ecosystem. Another one being how you apply automation first approaches. And what I mean by this is taking the kind of thinking we have around automated systems and applying it to other parts of your experimentation. This is really critical part of change management to transform your experiments to allow orchestration to start being applied. And then a little bit about how we apply this and a couple of examples about how orchestration have a real impact on the kind of work we like to aspire to do. Once I've talked about that, I really want to bring Crystal into the mix at that point. You'll have heard enough of me by then. And obviously you heard about our experiences here. And whilst I've worked very much on the commercial side of things or on the development side of things, Crystal has that deep knowledge of our products at HighRes in Solario OS and our orchestration layer, and has also stepped over from the customer side, so brings to the table that automation scientist expertise as we go into that discussion phase. So just to reiterate what Gina said, please feel free to submit questions through the chat as we go through the presentation. Feel free to ask any questions around things that we talk about. Hopefully I'll inspire some thoughts and maybe even antagonize some conversation, and feel free to ask questions about that. And also perhaps some, if you want to understand a bit more about how we do things at HighRes and our specific approaches, we can speak to that as well. So first of all, let's make a statement. I think that automation providers are best placed to build the tools for orchestration. And we'll speak to some reasons why that might be as we go through this. But there are a number of people that might approach this space around organization of experimentation in the laboratory. But when you think about some of these challenges that we're going to talk about, and in particular about how you connect the live real lab into the digital ecosystem, This is an area that we've been working in for decades already, and so we have this huge experience we can bring to the table, and we'll talk about some detail about that. But before we get into that, I'd like to talk about where orchestration has come from. And one of the reasons for covering this is I think orchestration, whilst it's now been a term we've used for several years, is still quite a nascent concept. And I'm not sure that everyone has exactly the same ideas about what it might mean to them. And that's a good thing, because orchestration is kind of a mindset and a toolkit that you can apply to a number of different scenarios. But to understand that more deeply and where it can have some real impact, it's kind of important to understand where it came from. And there are kind of three main areas where we saw, or certainly I saw, orchestration emerging. The first of those, which is the one that probably people most jump to in their thought process around what orchestration is around the organization of large automated facilities, in particular where you've got a number of work cells that are either joined together by digital connectivity, or more likely by mobile robots, or by conveyors or other kinds of transportation. And you think about how these things emerged. The very first versions of them were really a super scheduler sat over the top of other schedulers. So each automated work cell would have a scheduler, and then you put something over the top to organize all of them. And this is one of the first versions of orchestration that we started seeing emerging. In a very different vein, we've also seen a real emergence of the automation of long and complex experiments. And when I say that, I'm primarily thinking about anything to do with cell culture here. It could be cell line development, could be standardized cell culture, could be iPSC development, differentiation, or long-term cell-based screens. But these all have the same challenges, that they are long experiments where you do a small amount of work and then you wait for a bit, and then you do a small amount of work and wait for a bit. And when you start applying automation to that to maximize utilization, you want to start parallelizing those processes, and then you end up with a huge amount of chaos around organization and traceability. And so a certain format of orchestration has been brought to the table to solve that particular problem. So I have robustness in my sample traceability through that process, and I'm able to plan out what that experiment looks like over a long period of time. So this was another very common place where we saw orchestration type products being developed, or at least solutions being developed. Then the last area, which is, it's sort of adjacent but has become fundamental, is the desire to have a single integration layer that can connect what's happening in the lab to your ELN or your LIMS or the rest of your digital ecosystem. And this is where the other side of an orchestration layer comes in, where it's really designed to be that piece and provide that singular API. And handle that sort of contextualized data return back to the rest of the ecosystem. So if I was to try and summarize where we're at now and what orchestration is, it's the seamless coordination of instruments, data, people, and processes into a unified system. And this is something that then enables us to run whole experimental workflows efficiently, reliably, and traceably. And if I wanted to be even more succinct about it, it's about bringing order to complexity. And of course, the phrase orchestration comes from a very different space, where we think about that being done through a conductor. And it is much like that orchestral piece where we have all of these individual instruments coming together in harmony to do something beautiful. And that's exactly what orchestration should be empowering for us, if it's applied correctly. If we go into a bit more depth around that, and we think about what automation's actually delivering on today, there are 5 or 6 main pillars that you might see running through that. We have device coordination at the core of it. So managing all that communication between all of our diversity of laboratory systems to be able to execute multi-step processes automatically or with manual assistance. We have data automation, so capturing, harvesting, and sharing that data and contextualizing along the way is incredibly important. That idea of understanding what did we intend to do, what actually happened, and tying that back to a result. It also enables hybrid workflows to be run more effectively, and we'll talk a bit more about this later on, but the idea that we combine manual tasks, automated instruments, and logistics in one process. And this touches on a point that I will come back to a few times, where I want us to get past the idea of thinking that automation is just about large integrated systems. Automation might just mean a liquid handler. It might just mean an appliance that we want to use that's been set up to run a subset. It might even just be the automated data flow through a bunch of manually operated processes that are seamlessly linked. So automation doesn't just mean the kind of picture I've got on this bottom right with these huge integrated systems. It just means the application of some kind of automated process to our entire workflow. And a hybrid workflow is a great example of this, where we're going to do manual activities, we're going to use automated instruments and full integrated systems in harmony together. Orchestration should also be capable of doing task scheduling and coordination, so making sure that we maximize the utilization of our platforms, reduce bottlenecks, and ensuring that the samples and instruments are dynamically scheduled and appropriately used in the most efficient way. And that brings us on to our last point around reliability and logging and the efficiency that we gain through that. So we see this improved throughput, we see reduced human error. A lot of the core value propositions that you might expect to get from automated systems are really dialed up to 11 when you think about how you apply an orchestration layer over the top of that. So why should we care about this? I think I've just talked about a bunch about where it came from, the kind of features that we get from them. But what actual impact would this have if I was to apply orchestration to my laboratory today? And there are a few things, and this is why it's important to understand what this toolkit provides, because what you're doing and where you are, it's going to change exactly what you get out of orchestration. But I would say at its core, it should always maximize the value of the investments within the facility. So you make your disparate systems to work together rather than silos. You can also speed up processes and raise throughput whilst maintaining that quality and reproducibility. That's what I mean about some of these core automation value propositions really get dialed up when you add orchestration to the mix. And the last one is the one that I love, because I love the phrase that I hear from customers when they turn around and say, this is enabling me to do things I didn't think were previously possible, or it's enabling me to think about something which I haven't been able to think about before. So if you think about orchestration really opening up the capabilities of your facility to a wider audience, then all of a sudden it provides a platform for innovation. So manual and automated and data-driven steps can be brought together and exposed to more people, so labs can now iterate faster and take advantage of that. So this now starts moving into the next phase of the talk. We start talking about the challenges, like why aren't people doing this? And it's full of challenges as to why we haven't been able to implement orchestration in every lab. But I'm going to speak about two of the biggest ones that comes up routinely. One of them is integration of the physical landscape into the digital space is hard. And the other one is that we have to change our approaches to experiments. And that takes effort, right? We have to think about it. And I want to speak a little bit about what kind of changes we're really talking about there. So physical to digital, I think anyone that's really close to integrating automation right now will understand most of these points about why this is hard today to take things that we do manually or instruments that exist in the lab and bring them into a digitally connected space. The first one of these I want to touch on, and these are in no particular order, is the lack of standards. We've been talking about this in the industry for a long time. There have been some brilliant efforts to try and bring standards to the table. Very few of them have got robust traction. And what you end up driving towards as a result of that is automation vendors like HighRes having their own internalized standards to really try and apply their own version of that standard to the market as a whole. And it would be great if we had industry-wide standards, but it just is not a problem we've managed to solve just yet. Of course, we also have this diverse complexity of devices. So we've got everything from a shaker through to a complex liquid handler or a complex analytical device like an imaging system. They all require different levels of integration, and you can start making your life easier by thinking about instrument classes or treating them in groups together. But ultimately, there's this huge diversity that makes this challenging to have a one solution fits all approach. We also have a huge problem with integration readiness. I think when we think about automation in the guise of work cells, then of course we're mostly dealing with devices that are ready for integration. They've been built that way, both physically and with APIs that enable us to bring them to the table, but not all instruments have been built that way. And as we start applying orchestration to hybrid workflows, we have to think about how we integrate all of the instruments which aren't necessarily ready for integration. And then last but certainly not least is there is siloed knowledge. I always find it fascinating through the times I've been on client sites trying to figure out how we convert manual SOPs into automated workflows. And you can give an SOP and you read it, and then you go and you shadow the person in the lab actually doing it and how fundamentally different they are and how many unwritten things those people are doing which aren't captured in SOPs. And this is often siloed knowledge and stored whether within a few people's minds or not written down. This becomes a real blocker to us then understanding how we utilize those instruments correctly and ultimately integrate them into larger workflows. And of course, these are all things that we are deeply aware of because we are an automation provider and we haven't solved all of them. Having said that, how do we solve for this? I do believe that the automation industry as a whole is best placed to solve for it. We're already deeply immersed in it. And of course, I'm thinking about this going beyond those standard integrated devices into a much wider portfolio of instruments. There's also this huge, and I should say, I'm not just thinking about the automation vendors like HighRes here. I'm also thinking about the automation scientists and engineers that we work hand in hand with and provide them with toolkits to support them in integrating devices themselves. So a really good orchestration platform should allow our end users and our customers to also bring those devices into the system themselves. The point of raising all of this is I think that building an orchestration layer is only going to work if we do it on a foundation of strong connectors. From our perspective, we're starting out looking at this as how do we connect all those physical devices into the digital space and then build an orchestration on top of that. If we try and come at it the other way and think about building an orchestration layer and then worry about how we connect into the lab, we would fail. I am fairly certain of that. It would rely too heavily on other parts of the digital ecosystem to solve that problem for us, and then the value of orchestration gets diminished. Yeah, there are many areas where we could talk about here, but 3 points in particular I wanted to make is that as an automation vendor, we really understand deeply how to partner with instrument suppliers and have good conversations with them about how we make devices more integration friendly, not just physically, but digitally as well. We, of course, collectively have this deep knowledge and understand how to solve problems. I've seen plenty of wacky integrations that have been really clever ways of solving problems for devices that were never intended to be brought into a physical or a digital integration. And of course, we also have these libraries. So at HighRes, we have now 600 drivers or more. But we also, on top of that, have developed tools that enable people to build their own drivers or even access the driver library that they have and bring them into their own systems. All of this brought together gives us that fantastic foundation to try and solve this hugely challenging space. I'm going to change tack a little bit now and share with you a little bit about how this might work in our own orchestrator in Solaria OS, and just do a really simple, somewhat unrealistic experiment. In this lab, I have some standalone storage, I have a dispenser and physically in a different location, and a manually operated centrifuge, and of course a person to run those experiments. And I'm going to run this really simple experiment where I get an order from a limb system comes through. I then need to scan in the barcodes for the plates that I intend to run, move that labware over to the dispenser, use that dispenser, and in this instance, the dispenser is going to be controlled directly from the orchestrator. So we're going to execute that and deliver right down the right parameters to make sure we execute the right experiment through that dispenser. Then move that where so the human would be doing this to a manually operated centrifuge. And because it's not able to be integrated, we then also guide the user through how to set up that centrifuge correctly before finally returning that labware to storage. And of course, the system will report that back to the limbs. So just pivot over to showing you a brief video of our software in action. This is Solaria OS. Integrated to those same devices. And you can see the limb system has placed an order into Solaria OS for that particular experiment. I'm now going through the process of diarizing that, so putting it into the calendar to be run to make sure that fits into a time slot that's suitable. Once that's been diarized and it's ready to run at the appropriate time, OS is going to trigger that run to start. And now that run becomes active, prompting the user in their task area to go through that first step of scanning that barcode, having retrieved the samples from the storage device, in this case a picoserve, and then finally moving that onto the dispenser, and then I just mark that as being complete. The dispenser is now running, so that's being run automatically. And once that's completed, OS is going to ask us to take that same plate from the dispenser over to the centrifuge. Once I've completed that movement, we're then going to get the instructions on how to run that centrifuge. And then go through the process. I can go a bit deeper if I want to get some deeper instructions as well on exactly how I set that up. And then once I've completed that centrifugation step and set that up, I could flag that as complete. And then finally, it'll ask us to move the labware from the centrifuge back to the storage, and the reporting back to the LIM system will be automatically done on the completion of that experiment. So that's a really simple example about how you can bring orchestration into a semi-automated or manual environment. And of course, in OS, we also have this final step of just completing that order where we ask people to make sure they've removed all of the things from the system before saying they've done. A bit like when I speak to my children and say, like, hey, you haven't finished your job until you've tidied up afterwards. It's the same kind of concept. So now I'm move on to this third section and talk about an automation first approach and how we can apply that. So this is as much an attitude towards how we approach experiments and a change management piece as well at the same time. So what do I mean? Hey, Russ, what do you mean? Automation first approach. This sounds like some kind of nonsense, but it isn't. It's a really robust way of thinking about how you should design experiments. And over the past few years, I've heard more and more customers using this same language. And the principle of this is to say that we should automate where we can, and where we can't, we apply some of the same principles. And just to stress again, this doesn't mean building huge automated systems. It just means using automation where we can, and then bringing that same kind of mindset about what the automation brings to us for other steps. And that could be through liquid handlers. Again, it could be through simple devices, or it could be like these appliances like washers or dispensers. So I'm going to talk about 4 areas here. The first one of them being about how we design experiments, and taking the approach that we should assume automation from the start. Of course, that might involve asking the question, should we even automate this? It might not be suitable for automation, but where it is suitable for automation, we should start thinking about how might a robot run this? How might we take that approach of actually applying automation from the very outset? Also, how we'll capture data seamlessly, and I'll come back to that one in a moment because it often gets overlooked in this early stage. And then finally, and really importantly, think about what constraints need to be applied. I think whether you are an automation scientist or engineer in the lab, or whether you're working in conjunction with pre-sales expertise from one of the automation providers, this is one of the core challenges when you're converting something that is a manual experiment into something automated, is having that deep understanding of the science so you can look at the instruments available and how you might take an approach and say, where am I willing to give up something in order to gain that automation and the throughput and reliability and all the benefits that come with that? It's always like a really interesting and deep conversation saying, oh, this bit of my experiment must stay as it is, but I have other areas where I can maybe give a few things up in favor of taking advantage of the instruments that might be possible to make this automated. We should also think about how we standardize and modularize workflows. So that could, in its base form, come just simply around using consistent consumables, or even thinking about robot-friendly labware, even in manual processes that might enable us to bring more automation to the table later on. But also think about how we might break up protocols into modular steps. There are loads of good examples of this through genomics and screening and cell biology. One that I like to land on here that's really simple and hopefully relevant to a lot of people here is when you're running a cell-based assay, the front end of that experiment is almost certainly putting cells in a plate and feeding them and letting them recover to get your assay-ready plate. And then the second phase of it is running the actual assay. That first bit is a module in its own right that should be distinct and discrete, perhaps with a few variables that can allow it to be tuned for different cell lines. But the assay itself is often quite variable, and depending on exactly what you want to run. So as soon as we take those approaches, we can start chunking things up, and then you have a much more robust approach to all of your experiments. We should also think about how we get to predictable timing, and also think about our error states as well. I would love to say that everything goes right all the time. It doesn't. So we should think about where our critical points of failure are and how we want to respond to those. I touched on this in step one, but to make it its own point, we should really be thinking about data as a first-class product. I like to think when I'm mapping out these workflows that data is one of the first streams that we run through. Like, why do we run experiments, or why do we automate? We do it to gather data. We automate to get data of higher quality faster, right? So if we don't treat that data flow as a first-class product from the outset and think about how we remove manual steps, or think about how we have defined the metadata we want to capture, then we're going to have to try and lever that in later on, and it will be hard. And then finally, think about how we plan for scale and reliability. And there's a small anecdote about this. I won't name who it is, but someone who posts quite frequently on LinkedIn with some really interesting bits of thought leadership made a comment a while back. And part of the reason I'm not going to name them is because I'm probably going to butcher exactly what they said as I go through it. But the message they were trying to get across was, as I think about automation, and I'm given the choice between building a huge monolith that can automate every single step, or whether I automate a subsection of that that's most critical and perhaps do that in duplicate, I would always go for the latter, because now I can automate the core of a process, and I can do it in duplicate and spend the money on a pair of systems to give myself redundancy, and then handle the peripheral and upstream, downstream parts of the process in a slightly different way. And I thought that was a really interesting approach, because quite often we think an automation first approach implies automate everything. Is another great example of where you might not, in order to plan for scale and reliability. So even if you do all of this and you have an automation first approach to everything, it can still fall down. And the reason for that is that the experimental world and the automation world is fragmented. Experiments end up being a mixture of automated and manual steps. And that's where orchestration comes in, because if you apply that automation first thinking and that change management, and then link it with an orchestration package, you now have that bridge, right? And to reiterate some of the outcomes we mentioned earlier on, if you do these things together, you can now connect your manual and automated steps into a unified workflow and solve that problem. You can make your diverse instruments behave like a single unit and a single system. All of your data will be routed automatically, and collect all of that metadata you want to enrich your results will be captured automatically. You can now enable robustness, repeatability, and scalability, and of course, provide adaptability as the experiment evolves. So if you've modularized things well, for example, you might be able to chop and change those modules or bring in new components as your experimental needs change, as opposed to having one monolithic protocol that's hard to adapt. So we'll move into the last bit now. We just talk about a couple of examples. In particular, where does this go next? And it wouldn't be a current webinar if we didn't touch on the AI hot topic, and it's hard to get away from it. But it's something we've been talking about for more than a decade now, is how we drive the deep level of data that we need to collect, to enable machine learning or teaching of different AI models. And as we drive more data collection, what we discover is we need more, right? We should have enriched that data we collected even more with more metadata, that understanding of what did I intend to do, what actually happened, what's the results, how can I tie that all together, how do I annotate all my experiments correctly. This is only really possible with a fully orchestrated hybrid approach to automation and human experiments, right? Not experimenting on humans, but using humans with automation in conjunction. And we already see this, right? We already see this in particular in an area which I'm sure many people on the call know far better than I do, which is around the DMTA cycle. And just to highlight the difference that orchestration makes, not automation here, because this example here is already assuming that we have automation involved for some of the different steps in the DMTA cycle. And I'm not going to go through every single one of the bullet points in the circle here, but what I want to highlight is that even as you go around that cycle from design at the very top, round through make and test, and then finally analyze and then iterate upon that, all of these yellow boxes without an orchestrator become manual steps. So they become handoffs through email, chat, spreadsheets, file moving. You need to have an awful lot of coordination, because there's several automation platforms likely involved in this that need to be coordinated together and scheduled together. We now have error-prone mapping of samples from one step to the next. And all of this makes it really hard, nigh on impossible to parallelize, which is where you want to get the real power out of this kind of experimentation. When we apply orchestration, this becomes a different picture. Now, this becomes a seamless circle, more or less. There still is going to be some manual handoffs in there, but now these are coached and trained and guided by that orchestration layer. And we get a couple of other steps for free. So the automatic retraining of the model, and of course, all the dashboarding that we might get, so we get really high visibility of what's going on. And all of this together starts enabling us to run like really high throughput and parallelized examples. So your throughput possibilities go up manyfold as a result of having a true orchestration layer. And you get all of that with strong traceability for every single data point. I've got two more examples I want to share before we move on to the Q&A. The first of those is around compound management. And this is just to show that in the DMTA world, we're talking about a highly complex, multi-automation work cell, multi-human environment, fully orchestrated. Not all applications of orchestration need to be as complex as that. And we've been supplying automation to the compound management space where we've integrated with these informatics systems for many, many years already. And what we're finding is more and more of those clients want to move to a more advanced, more orchestrated layer that has in many ways a similar user journey, but allows you to do so much more and capture so much more data. So in this example, we're taking requests from informatics systems, which will often be the primary contact point for users as well. That then gets translated through the cloud integration, the orchestration layer, into some transfer requests. That gets passed down to the local instance, which then converts that into a list of actions that the devices actually have to follow. Having followed those instructions, we now pull out all of the metadata and the transfer results and push that back all the way through into the informatics layer, so you get really good plate registration of what actually happened. This has often been applied in particular in conjunction with work cells, but now we can apply it to all of those hybrid environments as well, where we have a number of manual steps or work cell steps, or even make that decision on the fly about what tooling is most appropriate to execute upon that in any given day, and starting getting some real power and really high utilization out of that already like fairly extensive fleet of automation you often see in a compound logistics facility. The last one I want to speak to is a little bit more abstract, and it's certainly the direction of travel that we see for larger facilities, and in particular where we have a set of capabilities running across both automation and manual facilities, and you want to orchestrate all of that. So in this example, what we have is an orchestration layer that is exposed site-wide to all of our scientists that want to request different kinds of experiments. And what we really want them to think about is what they want to do, not how it's done. So they might make requests in their own language, which is then inputted into the orchestration layer. And that orchestration layer is now able to take that input, allocate the appropriate resources, and schedule that into the system depending on what's available, and then execute upon that and provide really valuable instructions to all of the people actually running all of those tools in the laboratory. All of that allows you to get to this high state of operational excellence where you've got incredibly high utilization. Your visibility, both internally and to all of your users, becomes massive. And you have complete data continuity as well. So at the end of the day, you can return those contextualized results back to your customers that ultimately put your requests in. And so with that, I'm just going to start playing a video that talks you through a little bit around the HighRes product itself. I've not done an awful lot of talking about what HighRes actually produce here in terms of Solario OS. I would just encourage you to maybe think about some of the concepts that we talked about today. Also, I haven't talked too much about HighRes products, and I would urge you, if you're really interested in them after this talk, to get in contact with myself or Crystal, or even better, come and join us at the SLAS conference in Boston, where we're going to be showing a whole swathe of new things that I wouldn't have been able to talk about today as well. So some super exciting things in this space coming around the corner, and we'd love to share with you in a couple of months' time. With that, I'll pass back to Gina and certainly bring Crystal into the conversation to hopefully answer some of your questions.
First one is how difficult is it to integrate with already existing infrastructure like ELNs and LIMS systems?
But that's actually one of the most common questions we get. So thanks for asking. For as far as integrating with like ELNs or LIMS systems, um, it's pretty straightforward. I think most orchestration layers, again, if we're talking completely agnostic of HighRes, are meant to be kind of your one-stop shop for all of your information to shuttle back and forth. That's where, and I know for HighRes specifically, that's where we host a lot of our API. And so it's actually very straightforward to be able to connect with third-party software. And actually, what we've been doing a lot of is partnering with a lot of these people who have ELNs and LIM systems so that there's a direct connector from your starting point all the way through to your endpoints. So not only can you use your ELN and LIMS to kind of kick off your orders straight into OS, but you can also use um, OS to shuttle that information back into your systems as well. So that's a good question. Very straightforward.
I think it's worth picking up some of the work that you've done recently as well, Crystal. We've worked with a few vendors on this, but we shared recently at Benchling conference what this looks like to directly integrate and request things from Benchling directly into our platform, and how you go through that entire process. And so this like seamless integration is really, really becoming, easier and slicker than it ever has before.
It is. I think benchling is a wonderful example. Thanks, Russ, for bringing it up. I don't want to show off too much, but it is really exciting to see because what's happening in benchling is exactly that. They have their ELN. You can kick off your order in an ELN with a drop down menu. That'll send the orders to OS, which interacts with whatever you're using to get your orders completed. If that's an integrated robotic system, if that's some manual devices that you're working on yourself, that's all going to get done. And then Benchling is able to kind of auto parse the data package that's delivered back through OS. And then the data analysis automatically gets kicked off in their data analysis platform. And it's reduced the amount of clicks for users by such a significant amount. So I'm pretty excited to be working on things like this. And it's hopefully not the only thing that we're doing to continue to improve user experiences.
The next question is, would something like OS work across multiple sites?
I'll let you take that one as well, Crystal.
Okay, thanks. Um, I mean, the answer is yes. I think what most of our customers who have OS who are working in multiple sites are doing right now is having separate instances set up for their orchestration because their multiple sites are typically doing different things and they don't want to like kind of bog everything down with orders that are getting confused and everything. So, but it's highly user dependent. It's basically what you want to do for your lab. You can absolutely integrate multiple systems across multiple labs or whatever you're working with into a single instance of OS. But again, it's totally up to you. Whatever you want to do.
What does it look like for different kinds of users? Can everyone do everything, or are there restrictions?
That's a great question. And I'll defer that one as well, and I'll see if I've got any follow-up comments. So as long as your voice is okay.
Do you know what I'm doing? I have 2 mugs of tea over here. I'm still hanging in there. Um, so you can actually set that for your users. So basically, similar to most of the software that I've experienced out there, you can have kind of your super user levels, like your admin level of usage, where you can have access to everything. You can have more pared down roles. You're not necessarily allowed to like edit and change a bunch of things, but you're able to place your orders and requests and everything. You can have, an approver who's the one that's saying, okay, cool, this looks good. Let's continue to move forward with this process. And so you can set up whichever, personas that you're trying to work with.
Yeah, I think this comes up quite often actually, and people both concerned about exposing everything to everyone, and also then people concerned about making sure that they have the power to do what they want to do whilst giving the simplicity you need to other users. And if you think about that last diagram I showed, where you might have people requesting into the orchestration layer into OS of experiments they want to do, they don't necessarily care about all the details and the mechanics about how things are working. But of course, somebody else does have to care about that and understand how to map that scientific request onto the particular instruments or protocols that you want to execute upon. And so this is a super important bit of functionality. Certainly something that we have right now, and we're spending a lot of time speaking with our existing and future users about how we improve upon it as well, because there's a lot of devil in the detail about what you expose to different people and how much control you want to have over that.
Does orchestration mean you can just push a button and have everything run for you?
I think I started to say this earlier. So orchestration is meant to be your one-stop shop, essentially. It's meant to be a central location for all the information that you're working with and to like correlate the physical and digital and everything. And so it would be great to be able to just, push a single button and hit go and run with it. And, it's the experience that hopefully we're moving towards. But again, every single person in every single lab is going to have a different experience. They're going to have different requirements. And again, if there's somebody that needs to approve something, if there's somebody that needs to do something in a very specific order, those all need to be taken into consideration. So your experience in your lab needs to be customized, but hopefully someday we can get to that point where we can hit go and let everything do it for you.
Yeah, you nailed it, Crystal. As much as I like to talk about the idealistic scenarios we want to get to, and we're not that far off in some ways. The answer is no. It doesn't quite work like that today. But we're getting there. We're getting close all the time.
Could we develop one for just our regular lives?
These be great.
Um, in the age of vibe coding, as an orchestrator, will HighRes be looking at adding MCP integration?
Not entirely my area of expertise. I'm going to defer this one a little bit later because it touches on an area that we want to speak about more deeply in February. So we are thinking about this, and what I'm not clear on is exactly how we want to do that kind of implementation and connectivity to that kind of server. But if you want to hold that thought and take that offline, we might be able to talk about it a bit more privately. If not, please come and speak to us around SLAS or at the conference, and we could talk a bit more about how we're going to integrate more with AI ecosystems.
Yep. That's what I would have said. Not sure, but we're working on it.
When you start working with a new customer, completely new application, what does that process look like? What are the main steps in the proof of concept and the feasibility study? Do you help the customer identify the automations that they can integrate into the larger system? That's a very deep
So
question.
yeah, multi-part question, and I love it. So you were asking, what does it look like? What the like statement of work ends up being, and then if we help the customer or not, were the three questions to answer. So what does it look like? This is again probably going to vary a little bit from customer to customer, but we are trying to make sure that how we approach people is encompassing and works for most of the people that we're going to be working with. So essentially, if you're completely brand new, or if you're not brand new, even if you already have like some sort of high res products in your lab or your office already, um, we're probably going to approach you. We're going to have a sit down with all of your key stakeholders and then ask what you're trying to get done. We have a wonderful applications team who's going to work with you, who understands like more of the science that you're trying to work on, in addition to, what the engineers at HighRes can complete for you. If it's an integrated system you're looking for, if it's just an orchestration system that you're looking for, you're going to be working probably with, again, somebody on the applications team in addition to somebody like me to see if the solutions that we have already available are fit for your work. And if they are, great, then we can draft a statement of work that makes sense for both parties. Again, this is going to be very, very tailored to the customer specific needs. And then if there are solutions that are not necessarily created yet, because I mean, OS is still pretty new, orchestration in general processing is pretty nascent, as far as like something that works for a lot of different people. That's not just a very bespoke solution. So in that case, we talk about how to get new features into our roadmap and make sure that we're delivering things to you in the timing that works for you. And then as far as making sure after all that's done, after the conversations are done, the workshops are done, the statements of work are in place, the POs are in place, we also have now a customer success team, which is there. Like, we have a specific Slario OS customer success team who's like going to be there to be able to walk you through any of the issues that you might have. So as soon as you have completed all of the paperwork, you get assigned a person who's there as your support person in case anything is not going correctly. So it's like an email, or you generally chat with them however they need to, using our support tools to be able to reach out to them whenever you have any issues. But hopefully you don't have issues too frequently, and it's just, every 2 weeks you have a quick meeting, make sure things are going fine. And, if you have something new that you want to try, they can also help you with that. And I think that answers, I think that answered all three. I don't know if you want to add anything, Russ?
I like to think of it, and I've worked a lot on this side, on the vendor side in this particular role. So I like to think that when we embark on a project, as a customer, you're really engaging with a partner and a consultant who's going to bring all of that expertise to the table, the many, many decades of expertise within that team, as to how best translate your science into something that can be automated, and all those guys, as I mentioned before. And so you've got those two partners in the room. One is like really understands their science and what they want to achieve, and the other one really understands how to translate that into something which is now automatable. And I love to think of it that way. It's a real partnership, that process, with the kind of outputs that Crystal talked about. So yeah, the best way to find out is to get involved, come on a journey with us.
You can also ask. Like, I think everybody I've met at HighRes, and also like I was a HighRes customer for a long time. I was a customer of other automation and orchestration companies too. We won't tell anybody at HighRes that. But in any case, I don't think there's been a single vendor that I've worked with, whether it's like a single instrument or orchestration or automation in general, that hasn't wanted you to ask them questions, even if you're not committing to something. I think it's very reasonable to reach out if you have a connection, just be like, hey, I'm thinking of something like this. What would that look like in my specific case? If you want to share a little bit more of your own personal details, like, no problem at all. Nobody's gonna be like, oh, you have to commit right now to doing this, this, and this. Like, we want to make sure we're providing things that make sense for people, because like, otherwise, why is anybody doing what we're doing?
Crystal, this next question is going to be for you too, because it's for the organization that you're with. So, how does OS help streamline initial validation as well as changes within GXP environments?
Ooh. So this is exciting. So GXP environments is something that we've been talking about. We're not fully GXP compliant. Again, something we're talking about right now, but it definitely is going to be able to help you track everything that you need to track, essentially. So my first role was in a GMP lab, and it was a while ago. So everything was done completely on paper, but you have like your step-by-step um, protocols. They need to be signed off on step by step. You need to have your data associated with that protocol. You need to have all of that tracked. And OS is kind of doing all of that, just not in a technically like validated way, which is why we're not technically compliant. But it has all of your um, protocol steps associated with your metadata, associated with your raw data files. So therefore, it can help you um, set up, because you have the instructions there to know exactly what you're supposed to be doing. And it can also help you as far as any sort of like validation that your steps have been completed correctly and accurately within the amount of time that they were supposed to be completed. So it definitely helps. It's not technically certified GXP, but it absolutely can assist you in your processes.
When it comes to orchestration support, does HighRes work mainly in the drug discovery industry, or do you have experience supporting other industries such as polymer and material processing?
Right now, I think the majority of our customers are drug discovery, but we absolutely have customers in that area as well. It's not specific. It's anybody who's trying to automate a process that we're able to support. But Russ, did you have anything to add to that?
I think so. I'm not aware of anyone in that specific space that you described then. However, there are quite a few other industries where we also service customers, and there are some emerging ones that are really interesting as well. So it is primarily drug discovery, and we won't shy away from that. Where we send some really strong interest around the orchestration type products, actually also in the genomics, both research and clinical space. If you imagine where you've got fleets of liquid handlers doing different kinds of steps of the process and want to be allocated in different ways. and you've got this huge like resourcing and scheduling and traceability problems, that one's going down really, really well. I'm sort of not answering your question so directly because I don't know the space as well in terms of polymer discovery, but it'd be interesting to have a discussion about how we could apply it to that space. Right now, I don't see why we couldn't start applying these principles to a much wider audience. I think it just happens that our base customers have primarily been around the drug discovery and genomic space. But as we start talking about this wider set of capabilities, more and more market areas are coming to the table for us to have a discussion around what this might look like. So would be really interested to have a follow-up discussion from whoever asked that question as well, actually, to understand more about their particular space and what demands that entails.
Well, I don't see any more questions. So, Crystal, Russ, if there's any kind of closing comments you'd like to make.
That was great. Thank you so much for having us along to talk in this session. This is a really, really fascinating series, Gina, and we look forward to attending more of them. And just to reiterate, if you want to learn more, please get in contact with either of us. If you want to see all of the new exciting stuff that's coming out, please come and speak to us at or post SLAS in February.
I also would love to add, in addition to thank you for having us, if you have, if you're looking into something like this and you have ideas or you don't think it would be completely a fit, a solution for you, and you know what would make it better for you, like we're also open to discussing things that would make your lives easier, even if it's not something that's already available right now. So I'd love to hear about more of that if anybody wants to chat.
Great. Well, we hope to see you all in Boston at SLAS 2026.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.